Hey, what up? It's your boy coming at you live with a little after hours device specific styles crash course here from my living room. So, a couple things to note about device specific styles. There are several settings that can be configured uniquely across devices. And the way you can configure them across devices is by switching to the device that you want to configure on and then changing that setting. How do you know if the setting is device specific? Well, anytime you see an icon that means that you need to switch to a different device to change that setting. So for instance, this container, which houses just this paragraph module, this multiple buttons module, and has a background image of these uh, gorgeous hands holding this phone, has some device-specific settings. The first of which is padding on the left. And we did that just so that the text isn't so far to the left that it's more centered. So there's that. But there's also some device-specific styles that you might want to toggle for your background image. The most important of which are, well, the only two are these, and that's position and size. So the size parameter or setting can do a lot of funky things. So notice if I change to auto or cover or inherit, whatever, that changes the display of that background image pretty dramatically depending on what kind of image you have. So you can set your repeat settings and then also where the image starts to render from. So since I want this lovely lady's hand to kind of come out of the corner, I have it start from right bottom. But if it starts at the default left top, then it's going to be cut off and it's going to not look good. That's the default for any background image. So if the background image doesn't look good, just come in here, mess with the repeat settings, mess with where the image starts rendering, and mess with the size, and you'll see how that changes things. Now, also, you'll notice in this container setting I have things like the height is fit to content. The height of the container can also be set to fit to browser if you want to have the container dynamically adjust its height such that it's always the full vertical height of the viewport that is currently viewing the page on. Also, things like the width of the container, the width of the content within the container, parallax, etc. But let me show you how big of an impact that can have when I switch across devices. So if I come over to tablet, let's say, you see I'm looking at the same container here, and I double click to get in there. And if I ignore some of those settings and I just leave this as auto, then I get that. Right? So some people design on desktop and they don't come in here and find what they need to make their page or container look good across devices, and that can render a really bad experience, especially if you're ignoring mobile where most of the traffic is coming from. The other thing is based on the container setting for that background image, and if you have things like if you want your content to be vertically centered versus fixed based on what elements are in the container, that's going to change the way your background image scales. So let's say, for instance, I do something like size, cover, and you see how that image is scaling? So you can see a huge difference in the display of this container just by a couple settings. So you really have to be cognizant of that as you're making changes across devices to get the best look for each breakpoint. So for instance, I like this form, I really wanted this button to kind of intersect this swoop. So I messed with the container settings and the spacers within that container to really give me the look that I'm going for. That position where you're starting at center bottom or right bottom or whatever is really handy for creating these swoop-like effects. So if you have an image that has a slash out of the bottom or a swoop out of the bottom or something like that, a triangle or whatever, some sort of angular thing, and it just renders from left top, then you might not ever see that cutout. But if you render it from the right bottom or right center, I'm sorry, or bottom right, center left, then you're going to get that to show up first, which can be really helpful. And again, just notice as I make adjustments based on these settings and spacers and containers and things, how like I might really like how this, notice I have a transparent window here in this car. So I adjust that so that I can really notice that when I'm viewing the site. And it's those little things that allow you to polish your site to look good across devices, and really does give you an extra nice look on every device. And then again, notice that the padding, I was at 67 or something from the left for the text and button in this container, and as I go across and break down to smaller breakpoints, I adjust that padding so that there's not so much space off to the left. So it just takes a little bit of polishing, but once you have it all set, you can really make for a really good looking site. The other thing to keep in mind is, if you do spend a ton of time on a page to really give it a good look across devices, you can save that page as a template. So I'll go ahead and publish this. I made a couple changes. I don't know if they were any good or not. But you can save that as a template. So if I go to save as a template, just go ahead and screenshot your front end of the site, shrink it down to 350 by 460, and then you can create that template and make it visible just for yourself for future use. You can make it global for all users, put it in our global template gallery. But then you can go in there and just change text, swap out some buttons, swap out an image, and you've got a beautiful page that you're able to create very quickly because you put a lot of work into the template itself. And to access those, you just go to Add Page, and you'll find them in your template. So here are 3 that I've created. Those are really slick. I polished them up across all devices, and they look good. But hopefully this gallery will be built up with more and more of those templates, so that it'll be very easy to create stunning pages across all devices with just a few clicks. Hope that was helpful. Basically, just look out for this icon. That means it is device specific, and you got to change that across all 4 breakpoints. And that really applies to container settings, container background images. The last thing that I forgot to mention is that you can have device specific column widths. So here I've got a 3-column layout for this form. By default, we don't know what sort of widths you want. So this is probably, by default, it would look like half and half or something like this, and it looks wonky. So you got to come in here and adjust your column widths so that you don't end up with something like that, and you get exactly what you want. So know that your vertical margin that you get by dragging things up and down, the column widths that you get by dragging things side to side, those are also device specific. So as you go through your breakpoints, it's not just those padding settings, it's also the ability to adjust left and right, up and down within the page builder itself to help you get that exact look and spacing that you want. One last pro tip for you is you notice that on mine you see these outlines and things. It is kind of helpful when you're doing this type of work, when you're doing the polishing and the spacing work, to come up here and do show module outlines. So when you hide module outlines, you're only going to see the outlines for spacer modules. Otherwise, no modules will have outlines, but it can be helpful if you have an empty paragraph or something you're not able to see, to show module outlines, and then you're really able to understand all the different borders that you're able to drag and the adjustments that you're able to make across devices.